I was standing in my kitchen holding my passport when my husband looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Not like I was hurt. Not like I was a woman who had just spent the last 4 hours feeding, bathing, and putting to bed 2 children who were not mine, while 3 months postpartum and still wearing the same stretched-out nursing bra I'd had on since Tuesday. He looked at me like I was being dramatic. "Where are you even going?" Caleb said. I didn't answer him. I just set my passport on the counter, very carefully, the way you set something down when you're afraid of what you'll do if you throw it. And then I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because I was making a point, because my legs genuinely stopped working. That was the night I finally understood that the woman who had blown up my life wasn't Caleb's ex-girlfriend, or some secret he'd been keeping. She was his sister, and she had been doing it slowly for months, with a smile on her face and a notary stamp she had absolutely no right to use. But let me back up, because none of this makes sense without knowing what the first warm days of April felt like in this house before everything changed. We bought the place in March of last year, a 3-bedroom ranch house on a quiet street in Maplewood, about 22 miles outside of Columbus. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave from driveways, and the HOA newsletter comes printed on actual paper. Caleb had grown up 3 blocks away, which I thought was charming when we got married. I was 28, he was 31. We'd been together 2 years and married for 1. Our daughter, Nora, was born 6 weeks after we closed on the house. The timing was insane. The mortgage paperwork and the hospital bag were in the same tote. I'm a cook. Was a cook, technically, since I'd been on maternity leave since February. I worked the dinner line at Aldercroft, a mid-sized farm-to-table place downtown that paid just well enough to make me feel like a professional and just poorly enough to remind me I wasn't. I loved it anyway. The heat, the rhythm, the way a good service felt like a performance you got to be part of. I missed it, the way you miss a version of yourself that still had calluses on her hands and a reason to own $12 clogs. Home life was fine, good even most of the time. Caleb worked in project management for a construction firm, traveled occasionally, was the kind of husband who loaded the dishwasher wrong but always meant well. Nora was almost 3 months old and had just started doing that thing where she smiled at the ceiling fan like it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. I was exhausted, in the way that felt survivable. We had a 5-gallon aquarium on the living room bookshelf, 6 small tetras, and 1 very opinionated betta named Nothing, because Caleb refused to name fish, and I'd stopped fighting him on it. April came in soft that year. The magnolia 2 houses down bloomed early, the air smelled like cut grass and somebody's charcoal grill, and I remember standing on our back porch one evening with Nora strapped to my chest thinking, okay, this is actually okay. This is the life. That was approximately 2 weeks before Caleb's sister Darcy arrived. I need to tell you about Darcy because she matters more than anyone else in this story, and I want to be precise about her. Darcy was 34, Caleb's older sister by 3 years. She had the same dark eyes he did, the same habit of tilting her head when she was about to say something she'd already decided, the same way of making a request sound like a statement of existing fact. She lived 40 minutes away in Westerville with her husband Troy and their 2 kids, Gavin, who was 6, and Petra, who was 4. She worked part-time in real estate, which I mention now because it becomes relevant later in ways that made my blood pressure genuinely dangerous. I liked Darcy, at first. Or I liked the version of her I thought I knew. She'd been warm at our wedding, had sent a thoughtful gift when Nora was born, had texted me recipes when she found out I was a cook, which felt like an attempt at connection I genuinely appreciated. She wasn't the kind of sister-in-law who made you feel like an outsider at family dinners. She made you feel included in a way that, only later, I understood was strategic. The first thing I noticed was small. It was the second Saturday of April, one of those afternoons where the light comes through the windows sideways and makes everything look warmer than it is. Darcy stopped by unannounced, which was normal for her, apparently, a habit Caleb had never thought to mention, with both kids and a bottle of wine she didn't open. "Troy and I are having some issues," she said, sitting at my kitchen table while Gavin dragged his sneakers across my clean floor, and Petra attempted to dismantle the aquarium filter. "Oh," I said, "I'm sorry." "It's probably nothing," she said, in a tone that meant it was definitely something. She stayed for 3 hours. By the time she left, both kids had eaten my leftovers, Nora had been overstimulated into a screaming fit, and I'd somehow agreed to watch Gavin and Petra for a couple hours next week, while Darcy went to meet with a divorce attorney. I want to be clear. I said yes. I'm not pretending otherwise. I said yes because she was Caleb's circuit, and because it seemed like the decent thing to do, and because Nora was finally asleep, and I was too tired to think through what a couple hours might expand to mean. The attorney meeting was on a Wednesday. She dropped the kids at 9. She picked them up at 4:30. "How'd it go?" I asked when she came to the door. "Really productive," she said. She didn't ask how my day was. That was fine. Divorce is stressful. I gave her grace. The next time she called, it was a Tuesday evening, and Caleb answered. I was nursing Nora in the bedroom and could only hear his half of the conversation, which consisted mostly of, "Yeah, sure, of course," and "she won't mind." He came in afterward with the look he gets when he's already decided something and is now managing the announcement. "Darcy's situation is getting complicated," he said. "Okay," I said. "Troy moved out. She's having a hard time with the kids solo." "That's really hard," I said, and I meant it. "She's going to stay with us for a bit, just until she gets her footing." I looked at him. Nora had fallen asleep mid-feed and was making small piglet sounds against my collarbone. "How long is a bit?" I said. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe." I took a breath. "Caleb, we have a 3-month-old." "I know." "We have a 3-bedroom house. Nora's in the 3rd bedroom. Darcy can take the couch. The kids can share the guest room with an air mattress." I want you to understand what guest room means in our house. It is a room that contains a queen bed, a closet full of my off-season clothes, and a small desk where I had been doing all of my maternity leave administrative nonsense, insurance forms, pediatrician paperwork, the stack of things that never quite get filed. It was not a children's room. There were no child-proofed outlets. There was a glass lamp on the desk. "I need you to ask me," I said. "Not tell me, ask me." He paused. To his credit, he did pause. "Will you be okay with this?" he said. And there it was, the pause that made it feel like a question while being, structurally, still an announcement. Because what was I going to say? No? With his sister's divorce attorney's business card presumably sitting somewhere in her purse and 2 small children who'd done nothing wrong. "For a few weeks," I said, "and we're child-proofing those outlets before they arrive." Darcy and the kids moved in on a Friday. She brought 4 suitcases, a bag of toys, a second bag of toys, a sound machine for Petra, and a very specific set of opinions about where things should go in my kitchen. The first week was hard in the ways I expected. 2 extra children in a space built for 1 infant means a constant low-grade noise that lives behind your eyes. Gavin was actually pretty sweet, quiet, a reader, the kind of first grader who asked permission before touching things. Petra was 4 and therefore legally chaotic. She dumped a full box of crackers on the floor on day 2, pulled 2 of my tetras out of the tank before I caught her, both survived, barely, and screamed at a register that made Nora scream, which created a feedback loop of screaming I still hear in my dreams. But Darcy helped. She cooked dinner twice. She took the kids to the park. She seemed genuinely grateful, and I told myself, this is what family does. This is temporary. It was the second week when Caleb said the thing that made something cold move through my chest. We were doing dishes after dinner. The kids were in the guest room. Darcy was on the phone. Nora was in the baby swing, and he said, casually, like he was commenting on the weather, "I told Darcy she could stay as long as she needs. Through the summer, probably. Maybe longer if the custody stuff drags out." I turned off the faucet. "You told her what?" "She needs stability for the kids. You're on maternity leave anyway, so..." "So what?" I said. "So you're home. It's not like she'd be burdening you during work hours." I stared at him. The fish tank hummed on the shelf behind him. Nora's swing made its slow, rhythmic crew. "Caleb," I said, very carefully, "I am on maternity leave. That means I am recovering from childbirth and caring for our newborn. It does not mean I am a free childcare resource for your family. I'm not saying that. You literally just said that. I said you're home. I am home because I had a baby 11 weeks ago. He got quiet the way he gets when he knows he's wrong but isn't ready to say it, and I let it sit there. I didn't yell. I turned the faucet back on and finished the dishes, and I told myself we'd talk about it later, properly, when the kids were asleep and I wasn't shaking. We didn't talk about it later, because later, Darcy came downstairs with a question about the printer. She needed to print some documents, she said, for the divorce proceedings. She'd found what she needed in the home office drawer, the one where we kept the printer paper, and she just wanted to make sure it was okay to use our printer. I said of course. I didn't ask what she was printing. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the one that started everything. Because 3 weeks later, I would find out that Darcy hadn't just used our printer. She'd used our printer, our address, Caleb's signature, which she'd traced off a birthday card she'd found in that same drawer, and a notary seal she had access to, through her real estate license, to file paperwork that put both of her children on our household insurance plan, without asking either of us, without telling either of us, and that was only the first document. I found out about the insurance paperwork by accident. It was a Tuesday in early May, about 3 weeks after Darcy moved in. Nora had a well baby checkup, her 3-month visit, and when I handed over our insurance card at the front desk, the receptionist clicked through her screen and frowned in that way medical receptionists frown when something doesn't match. "I'm showing 4 dependents on this plan," she said. "That's wrong," I said. "It should be 3, me, my husband, and our daughter." She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. Nora's name was there, and below it, added just 11 days prior, Gavin Morrow. Petra Morrow. I stood at that counter for what felt like a very long time. Nora was in her car seat at my feet, staring up at the fluorescent lights with total serenity, completely unaware that the floor had just dropped out from under me. "I need to step outside for a second," I said. I called Caleb. He didn't pick up. I called him again. Still nothing. I texted, "Call me right now, not when you're free, right now." Then I went back inside, sat through Nora's checkup, smiled when the pediatrician said she was gaining weight beautifully, and drove home with my hands so tight on the wheel I could feel my pulse in my palms. Darcy was in the kitchen when I got home. She was cutting an apple into slices and had the news on low, and she looked so thoroughly, casually at home in my house that something in my throat went sharp. "Did you add your kids to our insurance plan?" I said. She didn't flinch. That was the thing that hit me hardest. She didn't flinch at all. She set down the knife, turned around and said, "I was going to tell you. Troy took them off his plan when he moved out, and I needed a temporary solution." "You forged Caleb's signature," I said. "I traced it," she said, "from a card. It's not. That is forgery, Darcy. It's a family plan. We're family." I looked at her. She looked back. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't let myself understand before. She wasn't embarrassed. She wasn't sorry. She was waiting to see if I was going to make this into a problem, or whether I was going to absorb it, the way I had absorbed everything else. The unannounced visits, the extended stay, the way she'd rearranged my spice cabinet without asking, the way she'd started signing Gavin's school forms with our address as his primary residence. I walked out of the kitchen. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. Nora's car seat was still in my other hand. I set it down on the floor very carefully. Caleb called back 20 minutes later. I told him what I'd found. There was a pause. "She probably just panicked," he said. "Troy cut them off the plan without warning." "She forged your signature, Caleb. She traced it from a card. I don't care what she traced it from. She used your signature on a legal document without your knowledge or consent. That is fraud." Another pause, longer this time. "Let me talk to her," he said. "You do that," I said. He talked to her. I don't know exactly what was said, I wasn't in the room, and he came out of it looking like a man who'd been told something he didn't quite know how to argue with. What he told me was that Darcy was under enormous stress, that Troy had been financially cutting her off since the separation, that the kids needed to be on some plan, and she hadn't had anywhere else to turn. "So she should have asked us," I said. "She knew you'd say no." I stared at him. "Then she didn't have our permission," I said. "That's what no means." He nodded. He said he understood. He said he'd make sure it didn't happen again. And then, 3 days later, I found the second document. It wasn't hidden, which is almost the worst part. It was in the printer tray. She'd printed something and left one page behind. I only saw it because I was printing a recipe I'd been working on, a lamb shoulder braise I was adapting from memory, trying to stay connected to the version of myself that still cooked for a reason other than keeping 4 people fed. The page was sitting right there, face up. It was a form from the Columbus City School District, an enrollment form, for Gavin, with our address listed as his permanent home address, signed, or granted, traced, by Caleb, as parent or legal guardian. I sat down at the desk. I read the whole thing. Our house, our names. His school would be the one 6 blocks from us, not the one he'd been attending in Westerville. The form was dated the previous week. She was enrolling her son in school from our address, without asking, using a signature she had no right to use. I thought about the insurance. I thought about the school form. I thought about what else I didn't know about, what else might be sitting in some database or filing cabinet somewhere with our names on it, our address, Caleb's signature, used without our knowledge to build a life she had decided she was going to construct inside our house, whether we agreed or not. I think that was the moment I truly hit the bottom, not because of the paperwork itself, as enraging as it was, but because I realized, sitting at that desk with a school enrollment form in my hands and Nora asleep in the next room, that I was completely alone in this, that Caleb was not going to be the person who protected our home, that every time I raised something, it would be softened, contextualized, absorbed into the story of Darcy's hard year, and I would be standing there holding evidence of something genuinely wrong while being made to feel like I was the one being unreasonable. I was 3.5 months postpartum. My body still didn't feel like mine. I was waking up twice a night to feed Nora. I hadn't been back to Aldercroft, hadn't seen most of my friends since January, hadn't had a single hour in this house alone since Darcy moved in. And I was being asked, not in words, but in every look and every softened conversation, to keep being gracious about it. I put the school form back in the printer tray. I didn't say anything to anyone, and I started paying attention in a different way. I started writing things down. Not dramatically, I wasn't keeping a journal, wasn't building a case file. I just started noting things in my phone, dates, what she'd printed, what she'd said, what Caleb had said in response. I noted the day I found the insurance form, the date on the school enrollment, the specific wording Caleb had used when he said, "She knew you'd say no," because that sentence had bothered me in a way I couldn't fully articulate yet, and I wanted to remember it exactly. I also, quietly, called my own insurance company. The representative was a woman named Sandra, who had the particular patience of someone who has heard many terrible things and learned not to react audibly. I explained that 2 individuals had been added to my family's health plan without my authorization. I gave their names. I asked what the process was to remove them and whether there was any liability on our end for claims they might have made in the interim. Sandra put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she told me that no claims had been filed yet under the 2 new names, that I could submit a written request to have them removed, and that because the addition had been made using what appeared to be a forged signature, I should document that fact in my removal request and consider contacting the plan's fraud department. Should I do that? I asked. Contact the fraud department? That's your call, Sandra said carefully. But if you don't, and claims are filed later, the situation gets more complicated. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't go to Caleb with any of it, not yet, because I had finally understood something. Every time I brought him a problem, the problem became about Darcy's circumstances, and my role became managing my reaction rather than addressing the actual issue. So I needed to be further along before I handed him anything. I needed to not be in a position where the conversation could be redirected. The person who finally helped me understand what I was actually dealing with was someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years. Her name was Renata. She and I had worked together at a restaurant before Aldercroft, a smaller place in German Village that had since closed, and she'd gone on to get her paralegal certification, while I'd moved up to line cook. We'd kept in loose touch, the way you do with people you genuinely like but don't have enough hours in the day to prioritize. She'd sent a gift when Nora was born. I'd liked her posts on Instagram. That was the extent of it. I texted her on a Thursday morning while Darcy was at the park with the kids and Nora was napping, and the house was, for 45 minutes, almost quiet. "Hey, random question, but do you have time to talk this week? I'm dealing with something and I think it might involve some legal stuff I don't understand." She called me back in 11 minutes. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is a skill not everyone has, and which I was particularly grateful for in that moment, because I needed to say it all in one piece before I lost my nerve. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Okay," Renata said. "So she has a real estate notary license?" "Yes. And she used it to notarize documents that benefited her directly, documents she also forged a signature on." "Yes." "That's not a gray area," Renata said. "Notaries have a specific legal obligation not to notarize documents where they have a personal interest. What she did with the insurance form alone could get her license revoked. The school enrollment form with a forged signature is potentially criminal. It depends on what Ohio statute you're looking at, but it's not nothing." I had known it was wrong, but hearing it laid out in those terms, license revocation, potentially criminal, made my hands go cold in a new way. "What do I do?" I said. "First," Renata said, "you stop telling your husband before you've documented everything, because right now every conversation you have with him is a conversation Darcy potentially hears about. Second, you need to talk to an actual attorney, not me, because I'm a paralegal and this is above my certification level. But I can tell you who to call. There's a woman named Diane Cho. She does family law and civil matters. She's based in Columbus. She's good, and she's not going to make you feel stupid for asking." I wrote the name down. Diane Cho, Columbus. "And third," Renata said, and her voice shifted slightly, "you need to be really sure about what you want the outcome to be, because once you start pulling on this, it's going to affect your marriage. You know that, right?" I looked out the window. The magnolia 2 houses down had finished blooming. The petals were on the sidewalk now, brown at the edges, dissolving into the concrete. "I know," I said. I called Diane Cho's office that afternoon and made an appointment for the following Monday. I told Caleb I had a postpartum checkup, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did need one. I just stopped scheduling it because there had always been something more pressing, someone else's need more immediate than my own, someone else's crisis louder than my quiet, accumulating one. That night, Darcy made pasta for dinner. She set the table, poured the kids' milk, cut Petra's noodles into pieces. She was genuinely good with her children, patient, attentive, funny in the particular way mothers of 4-year-olds learn to be funny. I watched her from across the table and thought, this is someone who loves her kids and will do absolutely anything to make sure they're okay, including things she has no right to do, including things she's decided she doesn't need permission for, because she's already decided the answer. Caleb refilled my water glass without being asked. He touched my shoulder as he walked past. Small gestures, the ordinary language of a marriage that was still, on its surface, intact. I smiled. I ate the pasta. I helped clear the table, and under the table, in my lap, my phone screen was open to the Notes app, where I had just added one more entry. School enrollment form, printer tray, Gavin's name, our address, Caleb's signature, not his. Monday couldn't come fast enough. Monday came with low clouds and the smell of rain that never actually arrived. I dropped Nora at my mother's, the first time I'd left her with anyone, which required its own separate act of courage, and drove downtown to Diane Cho's office on North High Street, a third-floor walk-up above a dry cleaner that smelled like steam and chemical roses. Diane Cho was 50, compact, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and the particular stillness of someone who has heard every version of every story and stopped being surprised by any of them. She let me talk for 12 minutes without interrupting. Then she pulled out a legal pad. "Walk me through the notary situation," she said. "Specifically, what license she holds and what she used it on." I walked her through it. I had the dates in my phone. I had the names of the documents. I told her about Sandra from the insurance company, about the school enrollment form in the printer tray, about Renata's assessment that it wasn't a gray area. "Your paralegal friend is right," Diane said. "Notaries in Ohio are prohibited from notarizing documents in which they have a direct financial or personal interest. Adding her children to your family insurance plan qualifies as a direct personal interest. Using a forged signature, regardless of how it was produced, compounds that significantly. The school enrollment form is a separate issue, but it's not a minor one. Falsifying a legal guardian signature on a district enrollment form can be treated as falsification of a government document under Ohio law." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means she has real exposure here, professionally and legally." Diane set down her pen. "The question I need you to answer is, what outcome do you want? Because you have options, and they're not all compatible with each other." I thought about that. I had thought about it since Renata had asked me the same thing, and I still didn't have a clean answer. I didn't want Darcy arrested. I didn't want Gavin and Petra to remember someday that their aunt had put their mother in handcuffs. But I also didn't want to keep living in a house where someone was systematically dismantling my boundaries with a notary stamp and a traced signature, and where my husband kept finding reasons why that was actually fine. "I want her out of my house," I said, "and I want to know that she can't do this again." "Okay," Diane said. "Those are achievable. Here's what I'd recommend." She laid it out. First, a formal written notice to the insurance company documenting the unauthorized addition and the forged signature, which would trigger their fraud review process. Not a criminal complaint, a civil one. Second, a letter from her office to Darcy outlining what had been done, what the legal exposure was, and what the conditions for avoiding a formal complaint to the Ohio Notary Commission would be. Those conditions would include vacating our property within a specified period, removing all unauthorized filings made using our address, and signing a document acknowledging she had no legal claim to our home or our identities. Third, a conversation with Caleb that I would need to have before any of this moved forward, because he was a party to the affected documents, and she needed his cooperation. "What if he doesn't cooperate?" I asked. She looked at me over her reading glasses in a way that was not unkind. "Then we're having a different conversation." I drove home slowly. Nora was still at my mother's, and the house was full of afternoon light and the sound of Gavin watching something on the tablet in the guest room, and Petra asking Darcy for juice. Ordinary sounds, the sounds of a life that had been quietly inserted into mine without permission. Caleb was home early. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing at the counter eating crackers over the sink, the way he does when he's avoiding sitting down, which he does when he's already anxious about something. "How was your appointment?" he said. "I need to talk to you," I said. "Now, not later, not after dinner, right now in the bedroom, with the door closed." He put down the crackers. I told him everything. Not the softened version, not the version I'd been managing for weeks to avoid the conversation getting redirected. The whole thing. Diane Cho, the legal exposure, the notary violation, the school enrollment form, Sandra from the insurance company, the specific phrase falsification of a government document. I told him what Diane had recommended and what I needed from him. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, the kind of quiet that isn't processing, it's stalling. "She's going through a divorce," he finally said. I had expected that. I had, genuinely, prepared for it. "I know she is," I said, "and I have been patient with that. I have fed her children and cleaned up after them, and absorbed every single thing she has done to this house, and to our paperwork, and to our lives for 2 months. And I have done it without complaint, because she is your sister, and she is going through something hard. But Caleb..." I stopped. I made sure he was looking at me. She used your name on legal documents. Not mine. Yours. She decided your signature was available to her whenever she needed it. That is not a sister having a hard year. That is someone who thinks she can use us as a resource without asking, because she's counted on you not to push back. Something shifted in his face. I'd hit something real. She knew you'd say no, he told me, weeks ago. I'd written it down, and now I said it back to him. You told me she knew I'd say no. You said that, which means she knew she was doing something we hadn't agreed to. She made that choice anyway. I paused. And you've been covering for her. Not because you think it's okay, but because it's easier than confronting her. I understand that. She's your sister. But I am your wife. And I am the one sitting in a lawyer's office while on maternity leave, because no one in this house was going to protect me if I didn't do it myself. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his hands over his face for a moment. Okay, he said from behind his hands. Okay, what? He dropped his hands. Okay, you're right, all of it. He looked exhausted in the way that men look when they've finally stopped carrying a story they were never comfortable with. I knew it was wrong. The signature thing. I told myself that she was panicking, that she'd fix it, that I'd talk to her. I didn't talk to her. I kept waiting for it to resolve itself. It doesn't resolve itself, I said. I know. You need to be the one to tell her, I said. Not me. She needs to hear it from you, and you need to mean it. He nodded. He was quiet again, but different this time, not stalling, settling. That conversation happened the next morning, at the kitchen table, while the kids were still asleep. I sat across from Darcy with my hands around a coffee mug. Caleb sat beside me. He'd asked if I wanted him to do it alone. I'd said no. I needed to be there. Not to perform anything, but because I was done being the person who waited in the other room while decisions about my life were made without me. Caleb laid it out. He was calm. He was clear. He told Darcy about the insurance form, about the school enrollment form, about the conversation with the attorney. He told her what her legal exposure was. He told her she needed to leave. Darcy listened with her face very still. I watched her the whole time. I saw the moment she calculated whether she could reframe it, whether she could make this about Caleb failing her, about me being cold, about the kids, about Troy, about any of the dozen narratives she'd been building for months. I saw her find the edge of it and decide not to jump. How long do I have? She said. 2 weeks, Caleb said. She looked at me then. Not with anger, I'd been braced for anger, with something closer to assessment, like she was trying to figure out exactly how much I knew and exactly how much I was willing to do about it. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. I know, I said. And then, because I had one thing I needed to say, one thing I'd been holding since the night I sat on the kitchen floor with my passport on the counter, I said it. You decided that my being home meant I was available. You decided that Caleb's signature was yours to use. You decided your kids living here was going to happen whether we agreed or not. You made every single one of those decisions without asking, because you were sure we'd absorb it. And the thing is, you were almost right. I almost let you. She looked away first. Darcy left in 12 days, not 14. She loaded the suitcases back into her car with Troy's help. They were apparently attempting some form of reconciliation, which I had no opinion about one way or another. Gavin hugged me before he got in the car. Petra did not, because Petra was 4 and had already moved on emotionally to the snack she'd been promised for the drive. I stood on the porch and watched them go. Diane Cho sent the letter to Darcy's attorney and a formal notification to the insurance company. Darcy's kids were removed from our plan within the week. The school district was notified that the enrollment form contained a falsified signature, and Gavin would be returning to his school in Westerville. The Ohio Notary Commission received a formal complaint, which Diane filed on my behalf. I don't know what came of the commission review. That process takes months, and the outcome isn't public. But the complaint was filed, and it was documented, and Darcy knew it. Caleb and I went to couples counseling. I want to say that plainly, without dressing it up. We went because I needed to know whether the pattern of him deciding things and announcing them was something we could change, or whether it was structural to who he was. The counselor's name was Victor Marsh, and he had an office in Bexley with a very ugly lamp that I stared at during most of the hard sessions. We went for 4 months. It helped, not in a tidy, fixed-it way, but in the way that honest conversations in a room with a witness tend to help. Caleb started asking instead of announcing. Not every time, enough times that I noticed. I went back to Aldercroft in September when Nora was 7 months old and had started pulling herself up on the edge of the coffee table and looking extremely pleased about it. My mother watched her 3 days a week. I walked back into that kitchen, and the sous chef, a guy named Terrence, who never remembered anyone's name, said, "Oh, you're the one who makes the lamb shoulder thing." And I thought, yes, that's me. That's exactly me. The aquarium is still on the bookshelf. We lost 2 of the tetras over the winter, just age, nothing dramatic, and Caleb replaced them with 3 new ones without being asked. He still refuses to name fish. I've stopped fighting him on it. Last Thanksgiving, Darcy came to Caleb's parents' house. I knew she would. I'd prepared myself for it. She was civil. I was civil. We sat at the same table and ate the same turkey and did not discuss any of it, which is the particular social contract of large American holiday meals. Troy was there too, so apparently the reconciliation had held, at least through November. Gavin had lost 2 teeth since I'd last seen him and was extremely interested in telling me about it. Petra had previously decided her favorite color was orange, which he mentioned 4 times. At one point during dishes, Darcy and I were briefly alone in the kitchen. She was drying a serving bowl, and I was putting away the leftover rolls, and the moment stretched in a way that required one of us to say something. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I did, with the paperwork." I looked at her. I thought about whether she meant it. I decided it didn't matter as much as I'd thought it would. "Thank you," I said. We finished the dishes. We went back to the living room. Her kids were chasing Caleb around the couch, and Nora was sitting in the middle of the rug, watching with the expression of someone who has just discovered that older children exist and isn't sure yet what to make of them. I sat down next to my daughter on the rug. She grabbed my finger with her whole fist, the way she still did, even now that she could do so much more. And I thought about the woman who had stood in that kitchen with a passport, legs giving out, trying to figure out how to protect something that was already hers. She'd figured it out. It just took her longer than it should have, and it cost more than it should have.